This time around, it's not going to be a build project, it's going to be a repair project. So my mill started making noise a long time ago. Basically what happens when I had the mill for a month, I once left the wrench for the drawbar, everyone's snickering right now, aren't you, in the drawbar, and forgot about it because my wife called me away. And when I came back, I thought I was ready, turned on the mill, wrench spins around, hits the motor housing, stalls the mill. And after that, started making a little bit of clicking noise, but not bad. But very recently, if you watch my videos, it's gotten a whole lot louder. And every time a cutter, one of the teeth impacts, you hear a big thunk. And it got really loud. So to the point where when I was using, whatchamacallit, so when I was using slitting saws, it was really obnoxious and it sounded like it was doing damage. So the first time I took this thing apart and I pulled the cap off the bottom back here, and there were some plastic bits in there, but I couldn't figure it out. So I kept going and the noise got louder and louder until recently I got to figure out what this is. So I took the side open here, which lets you see the pulley, and this isn't a variable speed mill. And you could see in, and the bottom of the rear pulley, the bottom piece in the rear pulley wobbled when it ran. And when it was under load, it wobbled even more severely. Let me open this up for you and let you see what's inside. So I don't know how easily you can see this, but the belt rides between two conical pulleys, and they squeeze the pulleys together and it pushes the belt out, making the diameter larger, or they open the pulleys apart, which makes the diameter smaller. And the bottom pulley in the back was wobbling all over the place, and that was proving to be a significant problem. So I took this thing apart and pulled the motor out. Now, I did this without showing you because I thought I was just going to send the whole assembly in and get it repaired, and it wasn't worth making a video about. But here's the belt that goes around the rear pulley. That's another conical pulley. And all it is to take the motor out, you take the bottom off just so you can see it, but you really don't need to remove that. You just take these 4 bolts out, tilt the motor towards the front of the milling machine, and it just falls right out. It's actually very easy, at least on this particular model. So let's head over to the motor and I'll show you what I found. Here we are looking top down at the motor, and I've actually taken this apart already. And the reason for that is because I was trying to figure out what the problem was before I sent it in, and I thought that I was just going to send it in and have it repaired. But it turns out that I think it'd make pretty good content for a video, because what was happening, this is the motor down here, and these are the 4 mounting points. This is the bottom pulley, and when it was running, I could see it doing this, and I couldn't figure out why. So when I took it apart, which is a little bit of a trick in and of itself, so there is this snap ring, that Jesus clip that goes along the top here, and this whole thing is compressed pretty heavily, and I was trying to figure out how to get that loose without it exploding, because it's under quite a bit of tension, as you can see here. And the trick, let me just unscrew this here, because this actually ultimately needs to be lined up with that right there, because it goes down here like this. So it's a lot of force. So I was trying to figure out how I could possibly align this myself. And here's the deal. I didn't know it at the time, but I talked to this repair gentleman who was very generous, and I'll put his information below, and just told me how to take this apart without struggling on my own. And see these 2 holes here? They line up normally with 2 threaded holes down here. And although this one's not lining up right now, I need to pop this piece out here and realign it. This whole assembly is designed to be tightened down with these 2 screws, and you can preload this plate with the 2 screws going to these 2 screw holes down here, which is pretty keen, but I didn't know that. So what I did was I just took a piece of steel bar, drilled some holes in it. And I fortunately had some of this stock lying around, because I needed access to the slip ring. So I put this over the top here, and you can see the slip ring would still be accessible. And then I just tightened these guys down and pulled the whole assembly together, and I was good to go. That actually made it really easy to disassemble. I didn't know anything about these others, and interestingly enough, the way this was put together, this doesn't actually line up because this key needs to line up with the keyway here. And when that is, as you can see here, these screw holes are 90 degrees to those screw holes. So when it was assembled, they didn't use that feature and they didn't assemble it to take advantage of that feature, which is kind of annoying. When I put it back together, I'm going to make sure it lines up so that if I ever need to pull this plate off, I can do it in the machine because I couldn't do it in the machine. But let me pull this out of the way here and I can show you what I found the problem was. So the first thing is this key that goes in the keyway here, goes in that direction. It's supposed to be screwed into this bottom pulley, but the screw is missing. So this key was flopping around. And the guy I talked to said, oh, it's going to destroy your keyway in no time. It's probably already destroyed. So I was panicked, figuring that's the way it was. But fortunately, it didn't happen. And the culprit ended up being is that this is what's left of them. There are two plastic bushings that keep this thing aligned on the pulley, on the motor shaft. And this is what the new ones look like. I got them sent to me from the manufacturer, and they snap into these grooves. And when the wrench caused this thing to stall, it caused the snap rings to shatter, and they're about 40 thousandths thick, and it caused this thing to wobble in there, which probably also made the key loosen the bolt on there, the nut that held it, or screw that held it in place, and this whole thing became loose. So that became a problem, but now I can fix it. So I actually bought some Delrin to make my own just in case these weren't the right size, but they look like they're going to be pretty good. I've heard, now your first question I came was, God, why didn't they make that out of brass or something? These are only 40 thousandths thick, and apparently there are some made out of brass, and they don't last anywhere near as long as the plastic ones do. Because in reality, there's not a lot of force on those. Those bushings are just to help this slide up and down to control the opening on the pulley, on how, what the speed is. And they're not directly responsible for any drive force directly. They're just going to take force that is taking the pulley and trying to rotate it on its axis, but the belt normally is going to pull straight. So there's a little bit of force, but not an overwhelming amount of force on them. So I don't know. I still think I would have preferred a nice big thick bronze sleeve in there, but that would have been expensive for the manufacturer to do. I'd like to open this hole up even more, put a big piece of bronze in there, and then put a keyway in. But in any case, that's not what the manufacturer did. And apparently bridge ports are made the exact same way. So we're just going to go with it. So I'm going to try and insert these bushings in here. And there are two of them, one on the bottom, one on the top. And I was told that if they don't fit snugly and they want to rotate a little bit, you should add a little epoxy, which means I need to clean out the inside of this pulley with some alcohol and clean them up. It doesn't look like there was epoxy before. We'll take a look and see. So hopefully you can see here the angle. I've got one bushing in that side, one bushing in that side. And I'm going to attach the key in next. And I asked the repair guy I talked to, who was incredibly helpful, if this should have been screwed in, and he said no, if it should have been Loctited in, the screw should be Loctited, and he said no, they don't need it, they just need to be snug. So I found another screw, and the original screw is lost somewhere. I could not find it. I searched inside the mill everywhere I could see without disassembling the whole thing, and I could not find it. So I am going to screw this key in and give it a good snugging and see how this whole thing fits. I haven't added any lubrication yet, but here's the key and the keyway, and the new ones are pretty snug. Wow, okay, that's a really good fit, actually. I thought it was going to be a little looser than that. That's actually really good. Okay, so I think we're going to add some, a little bit of grease to the shaft, because there was some there before. Wow, that is something else. Okay, so there's a lot of mechanical advantage to this, so hopefully, and the spring preload is really heavy. So I'm going to first clean this shaft off of the old lube. I'm going to add some molybdenum grease on it, and we'll see where that goes. I don't want to get grease up here because the belt can come up most of the way up to this shaft. Apparently these on my milling machine, these are M5 by 0.8 screws, which I need to write down because I'm going to order some threaded rod in case I need to assemble this in 2 pieces. And if that's the case, then I can order threaded rod and nuts and washers and just pull the piece on. But I'm going to try and put it in the way it came out because it was actually really easy to get out. So I'm hoping it's going to be that way again. I know going in will be a little harder, and I'm doing it by myself. I'm going to try and line these things up more or less correctly. And the important thing is the keyway. Oh, whoops, 180 out. Has to align with the keyway. Alrighty. That'll probably line the screw holes up automatically. So we're going to line this up with the keyway. And I'm going to use the fixture I built to put this guy back. So we'll just pop this guy on here. Throw some nuts on here. So I'm going to do this manually. Move this over here so you can see it. I'm going to do this manually, but this might be a good project to work with a drill motor and get it down a little bit quicker. Sorry about that. So I'm just going to tighten these and I'll bring you right back. I'm glad I double checked the snap ring before I released the tension on this, because one side had not quite popped in all the way because it was bent a little bit. There was so much pressure on it. Probably should have found a new one, but I didn't have this right size, so we're going to try and use this one. If it's not, I will look for the proper metric size snap ring. So we're going to next I'm going to loosen these guys to release tension and see how it all holds together. Alrighty, we're looking good here. I'm just going to do one last pass to clean any grease off of the pulleys, and then we're going to try and reassemble this in the mill. Alrighty, I can see why doing this by myself is going to be a bit of a trick, because you want to lean the motor this way towards the camera here, towards the front of the mill over here, to get it to fit in here. And at the same time, I've got to get the belt in. So how I'm going to be above and below at the same time is going to be a bit of a trick. I've got the bottom cap off, so maybe I'll stand on the ground, reach under with one hand, and try and tilt the motor with the other hand. We will see how well that works. I won't be able to show you that on camera because this is too high up, but when I get it done, I'll bring you back. All right, so the guy I talked to is right. It was pretty tough to wrestle this back in because I couldn't lean it by myself. But here's the interesting trick. So what I did was I went under here and I got the belt started on one corner of the pulley, and then I started to rotate it around by twisting right here on the motor shaft to pull the pulley around, which moved the motor out of its detent position. So it moved for me without me doing anything and went on very easily, just slid right on. So now I'm going to move this back, put the 4 bolts in, and we will see where we're at. All right, so fixing one thing broke another. So when I got the belt on so easily, the motor was shifted up and back. And what that meant was the little lip that sticks out on the bottom of this motor housing here would not mate with the equivalent piece on the head casting. So what I had to do was I put shims on the back because it was about that thick, about 3/8 of an inch thick, sticking down. So I put shims on the back so that this thing wouldn't be canted at an angle, because it's a pretty tight fit. So got it so it was just barely below the surface, and then I used a crowbar gently right here and this way as well, just to align one screw over here, and got the thread started very easily. Once I did that, it was mostly lined up straight, and then I could get it to slide down and fit in like it is now. I also double checked to make sure the belt was still on and hadn't fall off. Another really handy tool is a ratchet with a 8mm socket, 8mm Allen socket on mine, because this doesn't rotate easily here. So significant pain in the butt. So now what I have left to do is I got to wire this guy back up, put the base back on here, and see if this thing works. I'm going to turn it manually by hand first, and then we'll give it a shot. What I will say is, if you want it easy, get the 5mm bolts, threaded rod and nuts here, and then don't put the snap ring in here. Put the pulley in after the belt's on, and you'll have a lot easier time of it, especially if you're by yourself like I am. Apparently with 2 people it's not so bad, but it was a tough job by myself. So I recommend getting the bolts for it to tension the spring and put the C-clip on once the belt's already on, because then you can have the motor pre-seated in the housing, which is really easy, and then this will go. It didn't take me a long time, about 15-20 minutes, but it was a bit of a struggle, so just throwing it out there. Next up, we got to reattach the wires from the switch into the motor. Fortunately, they were all pre-labeled for me. I put some electrical tape on for safety, even though I really wasn't going to power it. But so I got to take the motor cover off and then put this guy on the inside, wire these guys up, and we'll be good to go. So here's the block that attaches to the motor inside. And before I took this apart, I made sure that this was labeled, which it is on the plastic block, UVW. And here are the wires with the matching labels on them. And before I took this guy apart, I made sure that they were labeled, because if you get them wrong, it's not a disaster. The motor will just go the opposite direction of what you expect, and you roll 2 phases and you're good to go. But I just want to get it back to factory original. So I'm going to wire this up real quick and I'll be right back. All right, so we're ready to test this guy out. I've already walked the belt around by hand. It seems to go all right. And the mill is on its highest speed, which makes it easiest to take the belt off and on. But that also is going to put a pretty heavy load on the rotary phase converter for startup. That is really smooth. Here we are going down to slower speeds. And it is freaking quiet. Holy cow, it hasn't been like this forever. It was clunking like crazy in the past. This is wonderful. This is like when it was brand new before I left the wrench in the drawbar. Holy cow. Hasn't sounded like this forever. So if your lathe is clunking, or your mill is clunking, this could be a possibility. One way to tell is you look back there and look at the bottom pulley and see if it's wobbling around. If it is, you've likely broken those plastic shims. If it's been going on a long time, you might have damaged the keyway, but if you're lucky like I am, it didn't. Boy, this is freaking wonderful. It hasn't sounded like this since I bought it. I forgot how nice it could sound. Anyways, this has been a fun project, and hopefully this will be useful for some of you. And hope you find it interesting. Hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.